Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. So it's been a little while. I'm here to do my September and October wrap up because again, it's been a little while. And just like not to go too much into it, September was an extremely busy month for me. And so I didn't do a lot of reading in the month of September. I actually only read or completed one book. Doing a September wrap up didn't make a lot of sense, but also like at the beginning of October, that first week, Albert and I went on a vacation, my husband. We went on a trip for about a week. It was like our little honeymoon after our wedding and stuff like that. We never really went on a honeymoon. So we took a little trip to Vermont. It was amazing. It was great. But then after that trip, my husband got sick and then I got sick. And then I've had like a lingering thing ever since then. And then there's been like just lots of other things going on. And so reading has kind of been on the back burner, although I do have a handful of books to talk about here today. But also like watching BookTube and recording videos and all of that stuff just has not been a top priority. I'm going to be completely honest. Dealing with everything else has. Like just making sure that real life goes on and, you know, just trying to stay healthy and take care of things and whatever. Like there's just been a lot on my plate lately, and so reading and BookTube has had to sit on the back burner. But yeah, with all that being said, I am here to talk about the books that I've read over the course of September and October. I only read one book in the month of September, and I have, I think, 3 books to talk about in October. I have the list over there. I didn't count ahead of time, and honestly, all of those were books that I read while on our vacation. I haven't done a lot of reading like post-vacation, or like I started some books and I just never finished them, and I like just finished one at the beginning of November, so that's a good sign. But yeah, just reading in general has been relatively slow, so doing a September and October wrap up all together works. So the first book I have to talk about is King, A Life by Jonathan Eig. This is a book that I had on my list, or had on my radar in general, because if you didn't see, over the summer I did a little reading vlog where I read all of the books that former President Obama put on his like summer reading list, and this was the one that I never got to in that video. I honestly didn't expect to get to it during that reading vlog because it is a pretty chunky book, and it did take me basically the entire month of September to read that book, which I was fine with. I think it's almost 700 pages in total, but that includes like the bibliography and notes and citations and all of that stuff that's usually included at the end of a big biography like that. But yeah, this is basically a biography of Martin Luther King Jr. I have never read any biographies about King, and so this was like my first exposure to one. But one of the things that Jonathan Eig says at the beginning of his book is the fact that he wrote this for a couple of different reasons. One was because there were new pieces of information that have come out about Dr. King's life. Basically, all of the FBI recordings and information that they've kept on him, like all the different files and things like that, were starting to become available in the public domain. And like there's like a number of years that the FBI can like keep certain pieces of information, things like that, and then they have to like release it to the public. And so we basically have been reaching those thresholds over the past couple of years. And so it's that combined with the fact that like the people who were alive while King was alive and like worked alongside him and things like that were like getting older and starting to pass away and things like that. And so he wanted to use both the information from that was coming out from the FBI, as well as like using like firsthand accounts and firsthand interviews to figure out who like Dr. Martin Luther King really was. And I think another thing that he talks about is the fact that like a lot of people have ideas about like who King was based on like his speeches, or they've like created like this almost pacified version of Dr. Martin Luther King and how he's just like this extremely beloved man and things like that. But he was actually an extremely controversial figure. People on like both sides of the political spectrum had problems with him for various reasons. He was like a very anxious person. It seems like he had bouts of depression and anxiety. And there are like these very like human aspects of who Dr. King was that have kind of been erased from history, because we have a tendency to take people like Dr. King and hold them on this pedestal and only talk about this in this extremely like saintly way. But they were human. They made terrible mistakes sometimes. They dealt with their own fears and sins and anxieties and whatnot and things like that. And Ig really wanted to capture the humanity of King, which I think he does really well. Like, there were times when I was reading this book where I was like, dang, like, I don't like the choices that this man is making. That's the point. Like, you're not supposed to agree 100% with anyone ever. Like, that just seems like a very unlikely thing to ever happen. But also, like, it just shows the humanness of who King was, and that he, like, made decisions that I think are bad decisions, especially when it comes to, like, his marriage and relationships and things along those lines. But it also just shows, like, the struggles that he had being put on this pedestal, or having, like, the weight of the civil rights movement placed upon him. And, like, he had to make a lot of, like, really difficult choices sometimes, or, like, a lot of people were looking at him to do certain things that he just couldn't do for a variety of reasons. And just reading about a person's life who now has such a legacy is, like, always really intriguing to me, especially in biographies like this where they really delve into, like, who he was as a human being. He's not trying to add to the mythology of King, really. He's really trying to tell as honest of a portrait as you possibly can of a person who, you know, died at an early age and stuff like that. So I honestly think it was a really, really great biography. I thought it was pretty engaging. There were times where I was like, oh, you're, like, skipping over pieces of history pretty quick, or not skipping over, but, like, going through them pretty quickly. But I think that, especially for, like, some of the bigger events, like the March on Washington and stuff like that, it probably chose to not get into the weeds around those events because there's lots of documentation around that stuff. And he really was just talking about everything from King's perspective, the work that he specifically had his hands in, the choices that he was making, and the best that he could with, like, the resources that are available to him. So I thought it was a really well done biography. I think that if you're looking for a biography on King, this is a really good one to read. And I think that it does a really good job of taking just, like, your preconceived notions around who this person was and just having you, like, confront them a little bit and think of a little bit about the way that we talk about famous people, especially the way we talk about famous people who have made a difference, but we tend to ignore any of the unsavory bits of who they may have been. The next book that I have to talk about is Wandering Souls by Cecile Pinn. This is a book that I'm not exactly sure why I had it on my radar. I might have just seen it, like, at my library and decided to pick it up. And this is the story following Vietnamese refugees who end up immigrating to London. So the story begins with these three siblings, one sister and two boys, who end up in Hong Kong. Their families deciding to leave Vietnam because of all of the just war and terrible things that are going on there. And the family splits up. So the parents and the younger siblings stay behind, and they send their older kids basically to Hong Kong to a refugee camp first. And the goal is that the parents and the younger siblings will come to that refugee camp in Hong Kong, and then they'll be, like, reunited there. However, only the older siblings end up making it to the camp, and so now they are orphaned and they are the only family that they have left. And so you follow them as they are living in the refugee camp. You see, like, what life is like for them there, and they're trying to figure out now, like, what they're going to do next. And they, through a variety of circumstances, end up immigrating over to the United Kingdom, and you follow their life there as they are growing up. I'm not going to say more than that. This is a relatively short book, less than 300 pages. It doesn't take very long to read. It's a very, like, beautiful and moving story where, like, I don't want to say too much about what happens, because I think seeing the characters go through this journey is part of the experience of it. This book does jump around in timeline a little bit, so you see, like, glimpses of different parts of their life, and you see kind of, like, how their life in their refugee camp ends up impacting the way that they live their life in the United Kingdom and stuff like that. And you see them, like, growing up and trying to figure out, like, what they're going to do now. You know, the oldest sister ends up taking a job at, like, a clothing factory, basically just to be able to make ends meet for their family and things like that. And she's, like, trying to encourage her younger brothers to study well so that way they can go to college, even though she didn't really get the opportunity for that herself. You see them dealing with the grief of, obviously, like, losing family members and having to leave their home country and acclimating to being in a completely different part of the world with a completely different culture and all of these different things. The one thing I will say, though, is that I only rated this book a 3-star rating because of the writing style. It's very lyrical, and there's something about it that like just kept me detached from the story the entire time. Like I thought overall, like it's really beautiful. It's really interesting to read, things like that. Again, it's on the shorter side. I do feel like some of the stuff that happens towards the end, like it's not a very satisfactory ending to a certain degree. But overall, I really enjoyed the story, and you could tell that like Cecile Pin is working to tell the story of Vietnamese refugees that's like based in reality, because there are parts of this that feel almost like it should have been like a memoir or a biography or something along those lines, but she decided to tell it as a fiction story. And there are parts of this that really are like difficult and heartbreaking and things like that. But something about the writing style just like didn't vibe with my brain all the time. So it wasn't one of those books that like I felt myself being called back to. Like I could tell like the writing style just didn't work with my brain as well as other writing styles do, which again is not necessarily a ding, because everyone, you know, has their own preferences and things like that. But there was a level of detachment that I could feel with this book compared to other books that I've read. So overall, it was a 3-star read for me, but still one that I would recommend to people, especially if you're interested in stories about Vietnamese refugees in the United Kingdom. So the next book that I read was Romantic Comedy by Curtin Sittenfeld. This was a book that I had heard a lot of people raving about this year, really enjoying it. And so I decided to put it on hold in my library. It came in like literally right before I was going on vacation. I was like, oh, this is perfect. A nice romantic comedy story for while I'm on vacation. This seems like good timing. So in the story, you are following this character named Sally. She is a writer on the show called The Night Owls, which is basically SNL. She is writing the skit, or she wrote this skit called the Danny Hortz Rule, which is based on her coworker, Danny Hortz, who is also a writer at SNL, and he is dating this like really beautiful actress named Annabelle, I believe. The Danny Hortz Rule is basically about how like schlubby guys can end up dating and marrying really beautiful women, but the reverse never happens. And so she ends up writing this skit about it, and it becomes like this whole like conversation around things like that. And the week that she ends up pitching the skit is the same week that this musician is doing the job of both hosting as well as being the musical artist for that week's episode. And so while she's working on getting her skits ready and things like that for that week's show, she ends up striking up a conversation with Noah, the artist, because he has his own sketch that he ends up pitching, and so they like work together on it. They hit it off really well, and the entire week she's basically like, there seems to be like something happening here, but also like she can't tell if it's just like her being caught up with like, you know, this really beautiful famous person being around and stuff like that. But there do seem to be some sparks there. But then things happen and it doesn't quite work out in the way that you think a romantic comedy should. So that's all I'll say officially about the synopsis of this book. I enjoyed this book, but I did not love this book. This book is actually broken up into 2 parts. And so the first part all takes place within that week of them prepping for this show, and then it jumps forward in time. And so I don't know if this is considered a spoiler. I don't think it's really a spoiler. The jump forward in time just jumps forward to 2020 during COVID and all this stuff. And basically like after the airing of the show, Sally and Noah end up having a moment that doesn't end well. And then basically they like lose touch for a handful of years. And then it jumps, and you find that out when it jumps forward to 2020. And then they end up reconnecting because of COVID. It's just like, okay. Like, it was just one of those things where it's just like, he decides to just like email her basically, and then they end up starting an email exchange, and that's how they end up getting reconnected, and things continue from there. And it's like one of those things where it felt very far-fetched to me, like the way that they end up rekindling their friendship and talking again just felt kind of like convenient, honestly. And I recognize that all romantic comedies have these tropes to them and things like that. And like even going along with the next book that I will talk about, like yes, this genre is filled with certain tropes and stuff like that, but it just felt a little too easy, honestly. But I will say that it does feel like this book is more about the main character, Sally, dealing with her own like insecurities and recognizing that she is like worthy of love and worthy of being loved by a person who is famous and handsome and things along those lines. And her just kind of like coming to appreciate her own self-worth and stuff like that. And so that aspect of the book I very much can get behind. And so that's why, like, overall I really enjoyed it. It's a really fun, quick read. I do appreciate this book, but it wasn't like a romantic book that I would like recommend to a lot of people. Like, it's fun, it's light, it does have a romantic aspect to it, but it's not like my favorite romantic story by any means. But I think I definitely understand like why people enjoyed this book so much. It just wasn't like a top read for me personally. Next, I have Happy Place by Emily Henry, which is an extremely popular romantic book. It was very funny to me that I read 2 romantic books back to back. They just happened to come up while I was on vacation. I was like, look, I'm fine with this. I will take some light reads while I'm on vacation. So this is Emily Henry's latest book. In the story, you are following this character named Harriet. She has been engaged to this guy named Wynn for a very long time, and very recently they have broken up, but they haven't really told anyone that their engagement is off. She is going on this trip. Basically, it's supposed to be a girls' trip to Maine, to her college friends' like Maine cabin that they've gone to on a pretty regular basis. It's her and 2 other friends from college. And her plan is to like go there and to tell them what has happened. Like, even though it's been months, she's like, I'm going to go on this trip and then I'll tell them what exactly is going on, that like Wynn and I have broken off our engagement. However, she gets there and she finds out that Wynn is also there because her friends have basically forced Wynn to come out there as well, because one of her college friends has decided that they're going to elope over the course of this week that they are together. And so Harriet and Wynn now have to pretend that they are still together because they don't want to ruin their friend's wedding weekend by talking about a broken up relationship. And they need to figure out like how to navigate all of this and navigate around their friends, and then how they're going to eventually tell everyone what's going on. So I've only read in its completion 1 other Emily Henry book, and that was Book Lovers. I liked it. It was fine. It was a 3-star read for me. I've tried to read a couple of her other books. I honestly don't remember which ones I've tried. And I would like start them and they weren't really working for me. And so I just thought like Emily Henry wasn't really going to be like a author for me, like another author that I think is just fine, but just like isn't going to be a favorite. And then I picked this one up, and honestly, like, I like this one a lot. And I think the reason why is because while this book is about Harriet and Wynn and their like broken engagement and therefore like their previous relationship and things like that, I think that the way the story is structured is done really well. One of the things that like Harriet does is that like when she's going through something extremely difficult or stressful, she like goes mentally to like her happy place. And so a lot of times her happy places are memories of like her and Wynn at certain places, or her and these 2 college friends in certain places and things like that. And so you end up seeing a lot of the past of these characters through her like going to these happy places, and also about how like a lot of her happy places can't be happy places anymore because they involve like her ex-fiance, and kind of dealing with that. But it's also about like her relationship and her friendship with these 2 people. Like, I honestly like really enjoyed the friendship aspect of this story. You see like these young women who are in their 20s, like life is moving forward, they're in serious relationships, you know, people are getting married and moving on and stuff like that, and you see them grappling with wanting to maintain these relationships that mean a lot to them from college, but also like they're growing up and things are changing, and it's like, how do you evolve as a person when your friends are like in completely different places, both physically as well as like emotionally? You know, like some people like regress when they're with certain friends like that, or they expect like their friends to stay exactly the same and their relationships to stay exactly the same, and that creates tension. When you're not in the same physical place anymore, it creates tension and it requires extra work. And when you're not willing to put in that work, like what does that mean and how do you navigate that? Like all of those parts of life are very real, and I think that this book does a really good job of talking about those tensions and like working through them to a certain degree. And I honestly like really enjoyed it for that. Like, I think because the friendships in this book are so strong are really what elevated it for me. Like, yes, the stuff with Harriet and Wynn were actually engaging to me. Like, I did enjoy them as a couple because I think they're written in a way that like you can tell like they have history and there's a lot of stuff going on. And there is obviously a little bit of mystery to it as well, because you don't know as a reader what happened in their relationship that's led to their marriage or their engagement being broken up and stuff like that. So I think that also is like a really good, clever way to build this story out. Like it keeps the reader engaged. So yeah, I mean, not that I've read every Emily Henry book, but I do think that this was a really enjoyable one. And I've seen a lot of people say like this is one of their favorites, and like I can see that for sure. Like I think that this is a really well done novel. I think this one has like a little bit more meat to it than some of the other ones did. At least, you know, again, I haven't read that many, but like I enjoy like the complexities of the relationships in this book a whole lot, which I think led to me enjoying this one a lot. So yeah, really enjoyed this one. Honestly, surprised by how much I enjoyed this one, and definitely a book I would recommend, especially if you are looking for something a little bit lighter to pick up. All right, and the final book that I read in October, I'm going to be really annoying about, because I'm not going to talk about it fully in this video, because I honestly want to do a full review on this book, and that is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I am a huge Ann Patchett fan, and I had been like waiting to pick this one up for no good reason, honestly. Partially just because I hadn't been reading a whole lot, and partially because I was like on the hold for it at the library. But while I was on vacation, I was at a bookstore and I wasn't really sure what to get, and then like I needed to leave really quickly because we were like on a wait list at a restaurant nearby, and they had like buzzed and they're like, your table's ready, and I was like, crap, I need to figure out what I'm gonna get. So I ended up picking up this because I was like, look, I want to read this book anyways, I'm probably gonna enjoy it. So I started this literally on the plane ride home, and then I just like kept reading it after we got back from vacation and basically finished it the next day. That's how much I enjoyed this book. So yes, I love this book. I want to talk about it kind of in detail, in depth, so I'm going to do a full review on it. But I will just say that I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this book. I really loved it a whole lot. I think this like really, really solidified Ann Patchett as like an all-time favorite author for me, because at this point I've like loved so many of her books that I'm like, yeah, no, she's like top tier for me now. So yes, there will be a video very soon, I promise, about this book in its entirety. But overall, if you are like on the fence about this book, I would say just pick it up because I really loved it. So yeah, that is everything I have to talk about in this video. Let me know down in the comments below how your reading has been going lately. Let me know if there's any really good books that you've picked up over the course of the last month or so. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.